first. This is Campaign 2026 special coverage.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, May 19th. It is primary election day here in Georgia, and the national spotlight is once again on the Peach State. Thank you for joining us here. You're watching ANF Plus, and voting is now underway across the state as voters decide key primary races that will shape the ballot in November. One of the biggest races we are watching today is the high-stakes battle for governor. 7 Democrats are on the ballot, fighting for the chance to flip the governor's mansion blue for the first time since Roy Barnes left office back in 2003. There are 8 Republicans on the ballot as well, fighting for the chance to represent their party in November's general election. Governor Brian Kemp has reached the end of his term. He will leave office in January. Also this year, the races for Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and U.S. Senate are all on the ballot that you will see today. Georgia Republicans are looking to flip one of the state's U.S. Senate seats as well that's currently occupied by the Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff. This is Ossoff's first reelection bid, having won his 6-year term in 2021. 5 Republican candidates are on the ballot in the primary race. This crowded field has led to plenty of infighting and, of course, those attack ads you see on your TVs and online every single day. And it's very likely at this point that this race heads to a runoff. And we do know at this point that Georgians have already hit the polls hard. The early voting period ended on Friday, May 15th. There was historic turnout. Take a look at your screen. You can see the map with the percentages there. More people in our state cast ballots in advanced voting than ever before. According to the Secretary of State's office, more than 1,019,000 ballots were cast early. Let's take a look closer now at the turnout in Metro Atlanta's Big 5 counties. DeKalb County leading the way with 18% early voting. Fulton was next with 16.6, Cobb finished at 15.2, Clayton at 14.4, Gwinnett finishing with 12.6% early voter turnout. So, lots of you have waited until today and will be voting today. We want to make sure you are totally prepared before you head to the polls. And it can be sometimes a little confusing when you get to your precinct and see your ballot. There is so much on there. So, you'll be asked to first choose one ballot, Democrat, Republican, or nonpartisan. Here's what you need to remember. If you request the Democratic ballot, you'll vote in the Democratic primary races. If you request the Republican ballot, you'll vote on Republican primary races. If you request the nonpartisan ballot, that one is just the judicial races, so no party contest. So you can't pick and choose candidates from both parties. You have to pick Republican, Democrat, or nonpartisan. That is very important to remember, and make sure you're prepared for that when you head into the voting booth. So you can expect more than just candidate names when you get your ballot. The Democratic and Republican ballots also include several party questions. Now, these are usually yes or no questions on issues like taxes, voting rules, school policies, cannabis, transit, immigration, and more. So they don't directly change any law, but what they do is they give the parties kind of a look at where the voters' priorities lie. So how you answer those questions will kind of influence the parties and how they move forward with legislation and the priorities of their party. One more reminder, Georgia law restricts phone use in the voting area. I know you like to take selfies and post things, but remember, you can only use a phone as an assistive device. That's usually for impaired voters. So make sure you look up your sample ballot online before you go to the polls. So it's not the first time you're seeing it when you get there today. You can find samples of all 3 ballots. Again, you have to pick one, Republican, Democrat, or nonpartisan. You can find that sample ballot on the Georgia Secretary of State website. We have a link to that website on the Atlanta News First app. We've all been looking at it here in the newsroom. This is very important, so you make sure you are prepared when you go to the polls today and vote. And Atlanta News First is going all hands on deck for the Georgia primary. We have got you covered all day long and well into the night. Atlanta News First, Sarah Hammond is joining us live this morning. She is at a voting location in Cobb County. So, Sarah, we've just learned they're already seeing some problems this morning. What are you hearing from officials and voters out there trying to vote?
Yeah, so we are learning from Cobb County elections officials that they are responding to some technical issues that are affecting some polling locations here in the county, like the one where we are at the Thompson Community Center. We know that some backup procedures are now in place, but voting remains ongoing. We're told that no polling locations have stopped voting operations at this point, but we have heard from some people inside who say things are moving a little slower than usual because everything is being done by hand at this voting precinct, and a few others that we've been told about from Cobb elections officials as well. That is what's happening in Cobb County right now.
Well, Sarah, you were also in Fulton County. You were at Buckhead Library earlier during our morning shows, and I'm just curious, what are you seeing as far as lines? We know we had historic early voter turnout. Have you seen anyone actually kind of having to wait in a long line to vote so far yet? I mean, the polls have been open for only a few hours, but what are you seeing?
I would say the only line that we did see at the Buckhead Library was right at the beginning of the morning. I'd say about 10 people were lined up at about 6:50 or so waiting to get in when those polls opened right at 7 o'clock. But I'm telling you, people were moving through. One woman we talked to, I think she said she timed herself. It took about 12 minutes or so for her to go in, fill out that ballot. We know it's a long ballot. There's a lot on both the Democratic and the Republican ballot. So that is primarily what's taking so long in Fulton County. But we talked to some people, those voters who say that, you know, it was so important for them to come out and cast their ballot on Election Day. They say it's a right that they do not take for granted. And I've heard from so many people who said, gosh, I wish I'd looked at the sample ballot before I went in to cast that ballot, because like I said, there is so much on the ballot. So a few of these voters told us that's exactly what they did. They did their research. They researched the candidates to make sure that they were making the most informed decision that they can as they go in to cast their ballot for this Georgia primary. Take a listen to what one couple had to say about that.
The biggest thing for this election is that the parties are still kind of deciding who's going to lead their party, right? So it's important to make your voice heard in the process at this point, because then when we go into the midterm, you'll be able to sort of control, say which direction you would like the party to go. And I think that's what's most important about today.
And like I said, we haven't seen super long lines today, but we know that polling locations, they get busy before work, during lunch, and once the workday ends. So we might see some fluctuations of crowds as we kind of make our way through the day. But just a reminder, you have until 7 o'clock tonight to get in line to vote. If you are in line by 7 o'clock, you will still be able to cast your ballot. We will also be keeping our eye on the situation here in Cobb County, where they're having some technical issues, so things are being done by hand at this point, and we will, of course, keep you updated as we go throughout the day. Live here at the Thompson Community Center in Cobb County, Sarah Hammond, Atlanta News First.
Sarah, you brought up so many good points. Please check your sample ballot before you head to the polls. That is great advice. Sarah Hammond reporting for us live in Cobb County. Thank you, Sarah, for that update. And just another thing I do want to mention, if you are voting today, make sure you not only check your sample ballot, but check your precinct. Do not always assume it's the same place. Even if you've been voting the same place for years, just double check to make sure that your precinct location remains the same. And of course, we did mention the race for Secretary of State. That ballot is flooded with people who believe they know how to best run Georgia's elections. 4 Democrats are fighting for that party's nomination. And then on the GOP side, 5 candidates are fighting to take the reins of the statewide office that has definitely come under scrutiny in the years since the 2020 election, when President Trump lost the state of Georgia. And voters will also elect a new chief law enforcement officer this year in Georgia. On the Republican side, state senators Bill Cowsert and Brian Strickland have both believed they have what it takes to be our state's next attorney general. There's also 2 Democrats on the ballot. They are State Representative Tanya Miller and former State Representative Bob Trammell. In almost all of these races, if no candidate claims a majority of the primary vote, the top 2 candidates will then head to a runoff next month. That has to be 50% plus 1. So to win a race outright in the state of Georgia, the candidate must receive 50% plus 1% of percentage points of the election. Now, another key factor in today's primary, young voters. Democrats have organizers speaking out while Republicans are betting on a quiet youth vote that doesn't show up publicly. Atlanta News First reporter Abby Kasoris spoke to a teenager who voted for the first time.
And voted the same day.
It's a really cool feeling to be able to express it within the government.
He expected long lines and confusion. Instead, in and out and walking taller after.
I feel cool. I feel awesome.
He's a part of something bigger. Early voting in the primary broke a record. More than 1 million voters statewide, according to the Georgia Secretary of State's office. And the state saw an uptick in young voters compared to past primaries. Signs new voters are leaning in, even when politics feels exhausting.
Democracy is still worth fighting for.
The left-leaning Georgia Youth Justice Coalition says young people aren't apathetic. They're fed up, and they're showing up anyway.
When politicians interfere in deeply personal medical decisions, the consequences are not abstract. They are life and death.
But turnout doesn't automatically mean engagement. Volunteering, door knocking, putting a name on a sign.
What you're really getting a lot of is none of that. People just do not want to be involved like that these days.
Chasten Atkins says some young conservatives still vote, but keep it quiet because the label can cost you friends, opportunities, even jobs.
The political climate that we're in now is so, toxic. People saying, I really don't want to be involved in this.
Analyst Ben Taylor at Kennesaw State University says social media is turbocharging turnout because the message hits fast and it spreads.
You do see the effect of social media, of influencers who are emphasizing get out the vote efforts.
The youth vote is up and both parties see the same opening. The question now, can they turn a record ballot into a real movement after the sticker comes off?
Abby Kasoris, Atlanta News First.
And of course, polls opened at 7 a.m. this morning. They close at 7 p.m. We cannot remind you enough. Check out your sample ballot before you go vote. You can do that on the Georgia Secretary of State website. We have a link to all of that information so you can be prepared when you go to the polls on the Atlanta News First website and the free Atlanta News First app. And Atlanta News First political reporter Doug Reardon spent some time with our political analyst, Dr. Ben Taylor, about how the choices made today will help set Georgia's direction for years to come.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, May 19th. It is primary day. And whether you have gone to the polls or not, we want to give you all the information you need on some of these races and, of course, on some of the voter impacts that these results will have. Thanks for joining us. I'm Atlanta News First Doug Reardon, joined by our political analyst, Dr. Ben Taylor. And Ben, I think we have to start off by talking about the people who have already gone to the polls. We saw some historic early voting numbers here in Georgia. A lot of people decided to get their votes cast before the actual primary day. Does that indicate anything to you? And as we look at the breakup between Democrats and Republicans, I think that tells a story as well.
I think so. I think you're exactly right. Over 1 million Georgians have already voted before Election Day, which is a record number. And then when you look at the partisan breakdown, Democrats had larger numbers of voters than Republicans did. That is to say, people who went to the ballot box and decided they wanted to cast a Democratic ticket or Republican ticket, because the primaries, you have to choose your party. And so that's really interesting because we've not seen Democrats be that enthusiastic, or we've not seen Democrats outvote Republicans like this in many, many cycles. So if you're a Democratic candidate, that must be good news to you. It means there's enthusiasm. It means there's excitement. And if you're a Republican candidate, then you're saying our voters come on Election Day. And so we'll have to wait and see what happens on Election Day today to see how that goes. But in the end, I think that this is going to be a very, very energetic and engaged electorate from now until the fall.
Yeah, we can expect one to follow the other, right? So you're anticipating some big turnout on today's in-person vote as well.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so, because you've got big races. You've got an open gubernatorial race. So we're going to have a new governor, and we're going to have a new lieutenant governor. We're going to have a new secretary of state. We're going to have a new attorney general. All of those races are competitive for both the Republican and Democratic parties. And more importantly, we've got a Senate seat, a Senate nomination for the Republicans going up against incumbent Senator John Ossoff in the fall. But you've got some really high-profile Republicans who have raised a lot of money who are trying to see who's going to win that nomination, or more specifically, most likely, who's going to make the runoff.
Right. So. And before we move on to talking about some of those races, one of the very interesting things to watch has been this younger voter turnout that has been really growing over the past couple of years. We always see these demographics split up. We got the 18 to 24 and the 55 to 65. those older groups are typically more reliable, but we are seeing a lot bigger turnout numbers for these younger voters in recent years. You know, whether it's social media doing this or targeted, you know, get out the vote campaigns towards younger voters, what is driving this and how is it impacting things?
Well, I think what's happening right now is you do see the effect of social media. So now you have influencers who are emphasizing get out the vote efforts and things of this nature. And also, quite honestly, it's much easier to get registered to vote today than it has been in decades past. And so it's all done online. You know, you send in your verifying information and it can be done very quickly. And so I think that's all part of it. But the other thing to consider is that Georgia is just a very competitive state. And so young people even can understand that and feel that. And so as that competitiveness just sort of permeates throughout sort of people's understanding of politics in an area, people want to be involved and engaged. And I think that that's all part of what you're seeing. But I don't think you can discount the fact that there are a lot of efforts, as there have been. But with social media, the effectiveness of those efforts to get young people specifically involved are just much, much more effective now.
You don't need a $50 million ad buy. You need a TikTok account, and you can do almost the same thing with the same reach. And, you know, last time I checked, 18 to 24-year-olds are paying for gas as well.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, you know, while we're still going to talk about some of these races, do you think that there are issues at large that people are voting on more so than candidates, especially this year?
I think just the general mood of the public is something that we should take into account. We talk a lot about this in political science, like what is the mood of the public? I mean, it's somewhat esoteric and it's not real specific, but in general, you see this a lot in midterm elections, where the general mood of the public is somewhat anti the president's party. And in this case, right now, that's Republicans. President Trump, with a Republican Congress, is very, very low approval ratings, right? President Trump is at historically low approval ratings, like in all of the history of American public opinion. And that is very important. And so the mood of the public is somewhat dour. It's somewhat antagonistic to the current administration and the current party in power. I think that's what you're seeing. And of course, obviously, people pay money. You know, they go to the gas pump and see what a gallon of gas costs. They go to the grocery store and see what their grocery bill is. And all of those things matter. But I think generally it's just really the public mood. And I think that's why you've seen such engagement among Democratic voters so early in the process. Again, we'll see what happens, you know, when all the voting is done, like where are Republicans and Democrats in terms of who turned out more of their voters. But I think all of that really matters. And I think more than any specific issue, it's just sort of that general antagonism that people are sort of expressing a little bit right now. And you've seen that not just in Georgia, but I think across the country.
Yeah, let's talk about some of these races. You mentioned President Trump's approval ratings. You know, he's had some success throwing his endorsements behind even some primary challengers in states like Louisiana and Indiana as well. Yeah. And we've seen him really turn out some results for those candidates that challenged incumbents, which is hard to do.
That's right.
He has endorsed Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in this race, and it is a tight one between him and billionaire businessman Rick Jackson. And so is this, in a way, when people go to the polls tomorrow, if they get a Republican ballot and they look at this race for governor on the GOP side, is it in some way a test of Donald Trump's political power here in Georgia?
Well, I think it must be, because President Trump has been very vocal and out front about his support of Lieutenant Governor Jones, and Lieutenant Governor Jones has been very adamant and very vocal about that support, and he's worked very hard for it. He's been a Trump supporter his entire time in public life, and so, you know, it makes sense that this is something that's a real credential for him. And so if that's the case, and yet Lieutenant Governor Jones doesn't win outright, then there must be some sort of sense that is something of a referendum on Donald Trump for Georgia Republicans. Although I would say that, you know, Rick Jackson, to his, you know, looking at his campaign commercials, has also been trying to align himself with President Trump, despite the fact he has not gotten the endorsement. He's definitely a Trump-aligned Republican, at least that's how he's running. And so I think that perhaps it's not quite the referendum that we might once had if there was no other candidate trying to make that claim. But I think you can also see that a little less so in the Senate race. There's not an actual endorsement in that race, but I think both Representative Carter and Collins are both trying to run as the Trump, you know, type candidate against Eric Dooley, who does not talk poorly about President Trump, but has his ads and his campaign has made clear that he would be some sort of outsider voice, which seems like he may not be embracing President Trump as closely as other Republicans have.
Right, and you notice he hasn't made an endorsement in that Senate primary yet either. All right, real quick, let's talk about the Democratic side too, because we have Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is, you know, head and shoulders above some of these other candidates, and there are a lot of them in this race for the Democratic nominee. We've seen polls that have her in double-digit leads, 20-point leads. You know, do you put stock into that? I mean, she's got name recognition for sure, but there's a lot of undecided voters out there.
Yeah, there are a lot of the poll data that we've gotten, which has been somewhat sparse, I will say, has shown large undecided proportions of voters on both Democratic and Republican sides of the primary election. So I think for former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, name recognition is worth its weight in gold here. She was a member of the Biden administration, so that may be something of an anchor in the general election, but might help her in the primary. But the name recognition is something that you simply just have to have, and she's got it. And other Democratic candidates don't to that extent. And so she's been able to save some money and save time being on the air, like these other candidates have tried to get on the air with campaign commercials recently. And so I think that that's been a real benefit for her. The question is, does she make that 50% mark on election day? And I'm not sure. I just think that the number of undecided voters and just sort of the number of candidates in that race just make it very unpredictable. And we don't even know, it's difficult to get a sense of who might even come in second place. There are, it could literally be anybody on the ticket. Yeah. So it's just going to be very difficult. It's almost impossible to handicap.
We're going to have a lot of runoffs,
yes.
In short.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. Well, Dr. Ben Taylor, a political analyst, thank you as always. And thank you for watching. We're going to have Ben back in a couple of minutes here just to talk a little bit more about what we got going on as the day progresses. We hope you've made your plan to vote. We certainly encourage everyone to get out there and do just that. I'm Doug Reardon. We'll send it back to you guys at the desk.
Welcome back. It is 11:26 on Tuesday, May 19th. It is primary election day in Georgia. You are watching ANF Plus, and Atlanta News First has you covered for all things election day. We want to remind you polls are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. A reminder, when you get into your booth, you will be having to pick a ballot. You can only pick a Democrat, Republican, or nonpartisan ballot. Also, you can expect to see plenty of party questions on that ballot. You cannot use your phone at any time. Remember that. We really are encouraging you to review that sample ballot before voting. There is a lot on there. And of course, do not forget your voter ID. And right now, many of you are heading to the polls to pick the party's nominees for governor, secretary of state, U.S. Senate, and lots of other key races that we look ahead to the November midterms. There's a lot at stake here in the Peach State that will have national implications. Atlanta News First anchor Rick Fulbaum recently sat down with the leaders of Georgia's Democrat and Republican parties to see how they're feeling about today's primary.
Well, I feel good. We have had, I'm sure you've seen the early voting numbers. Democrats are out balloting Republicans at this point, and it's quite an improvement over any of these past years. And I think that speaks to the voters being fed up with both 23 years of Republican rule, and they're fed up with the old fool in D.C.
What is your message to voters as they head into the voting booths?
We still live in a democracy. We still live in a republic, and your power is in your vote. And so come out and send a message to these Republicans, both in the state and in D.C., that you don't want a government that rewards billionaires, big corporations, and whoever the latest lobbyist was to buy somebody a bourbon in the state.
How are you feeling heading into primary day on Tuesday?
Well, we've been waiting a long time for this. We're excited to begin the process of getting our nominees. I know there's a lot of excitement all over the state, and so very much looking forward to Tuesday night.
The last time you and I spoke, it was before the PSC special elections, and we were talking about whether that was going to be an indicator of what the midterms might look like. You told me at the time that you did not think that, and obviously, as we know, two Democrats went on to win those races. Do you have any different thoughts heading in now and knowing what you know about the special election as we head into the midterms now? Do you think that those races will have been representative?
Well, we've had special elections in Georgia every month since August of last year, and Republicans have won almost every one of those elections. We had a state house race in Athens that didn't go our way. That also happened 8 years ago. The PSC races you talked about, if I wanted to design a statewide election for Democrats to win, I don't think I could have done a better job. You put it in the odd year. You put it in a year where only municipalities were voting and had other things on the ballot. Our voters are disproportionately in rural, unincorporated parts of the state. So, no, I don't really take any predictive value of those PSC races. Georgia's a competitive state, and I think the last time I talked to you, I mentioned this. We've got to earn it. We've got to earn it every election. And I'm very pleased at our record in the special elections that we were able to retain a number of state legislative seats and a congressional seat back in April. And I think we're going to continue to do well when we get to the fall election in November.
That was Atlanta News First, Rick Fulbaum, and we will have coverage all day long and all tonight on Atlanta News First and ANF Plus of your Georgia primary elections. We want to remind everyone you can go to our website and our free app to get everything you need to know before you go vote. To make sure you're checking your sample ballot, make sure you have your voter ID, and stick with us all day on air and online for our coverage. We'll see you in just a few minutes at noon.
Thank you for watching ANF Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.